The lights of the chamber were harsh, the air tense, and the silence sharp enough to cut through steel. It was in that silence that Lisa Murkowski leaned forward, eyes narrowed, and delivered a line meant not just a wound but to define. Your entire political career is nothing more than a fleeting headline, Jasmine. The words hung like poison in the air, rippling through the room. Gasps echoed. A few smirks broke across the faces of Murkowski's allies. For a split second, it seemed as though Crockett had been cornered. But silence can be a weapon, too. Crockett didn't flinch, didn't fire back immediately. She let the insult breathe, let hang, let Murkowski believe she had struck a fatal blow. Cameras zoomed in, commentators whispered from their seats, and the audience shifted nervously, as if holding its breath. This wasn't just another exchange. It felt like the start of a clash that could redefine reputations in real time. The hook wasn't the insult itself. It was the anticipation. What would Crockett do? How would she respond? Would she absorb it, or would she unleash something no one expected? The debate hall, once filled with the usual noise of political back and forth, was now electrified with the suspense of a single unanswered jab. And that's exactly how Murkowski wanted it. She reveled in the moment, her smirk deepening as she leaned back in her chair, already imagining the headlines. Murkowski dismantles Crockett. Her confidence painted her as a towering figure, the seasoned veteran putting a young challenger in her place. But arrogance has a way of blinding even the sharpest operators, because what Murkowski failed to see was a fire building behind Crockett's steady gaze. A fire that came not from anger alone, but from years of being underestimated, dismissed, and told her voice didn't belong. The crowd didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness a shift. They were about to see what happens when an insult meant to belittle instead awakens something greater. The kind of moment where careers don't crumble, they ignite. And just as the room began to lean in closer, waiting for her to speak, Jasmine Crockett parted her lips with the calm of someone who knew exactly what was coming next. But what she said didn't just silence Murkowski. It sent shockwaves far beyond that chamber. The debate wasn't just about policy that night. It was about credibility, identity, and who would have a moral high ground in America's political imagination. Murkowski's jab wasn't a stray remark. It was a carefully calculated attempt to frame Jasmine Crockett as small, inexperienced, and disposable. For Murkowski, the attack was strategy. For Crockett, it was survival. That's what made the moment so dangerous. In politics, perception is power. A single insult, if left unchecked, can cement itself in the minds of millions. Crockett knew that. Every viewer at home knew that. And so the tension wasn't simply about one woman insulting another. It was about whether a rising voice could withstand the crushing weight of an establishment figure's dismissal. Murkowski's allies doubled down in subtle gestures. Nods of approval, whispered chuckles. The smug confidence of those who thought the match was already decided. The crowd inside the chamber shifted uneasily, torn between fascination and discomfort. And beyond those walls, America was watching. Clips were already being prepared by networks eager to crown a winner or declare a casualty. But here's what Murkowski hadn't accounted for. The very thing she thought would weaken Crockett was what made her powerful. The jab about her career wasn't an ending. It was the perfect setup for a story of resilience. Crockett's path had never been about shortcuts, nor about fitting into molds designed by others. Every step of her journey had been fought for, clawed for, earned in the face of the same arrogance now smirking across from her. And so the stakes rose higher. This was no longer just a debate. It was a referendum on who gets to define worth in America's public square. Would it be the entrenched voices who guard their power with sharp tongues, or the new leaders who refuse to be diminished by them? The audience didn't know it yet, but they were standing at the edge of a turning point. One sentence had turned this night into something larger, a battle over dignity, belonging, and the right to be heard. What came next would decide not just the outcome of the debate, but the legacy of the confrontation itself. Lisa Murkowski's rise to power had never been accidental. Born into political lineage, raised in the halls of influence, she was accustomed to the weight of authority. For decades, she had navigated Washington with the calm certainty of someone who belonged there. She wore moderation like armor, presenting herself as a steady hand in turbulent times. To many, she was a voice of balance. But to her critics, that balance was nothing more than a mask for entitlement. Behind the polished reputation lay a history of contradictions. Murkowski spoke of fairness, yet repeatedly stood with the establishment when it suited her. She claimed independence, yet her career had been carved by privilege, not struggle. For years, she'd wielded her experience like a shield, reminding opponents that her tenure itself was proof of legitimacy. That night, the same instinct drove her. She looked at Jasmine Crockett not as a peer, but as an interloper, a newcomer who hadn't earned the right to challenge her. The jab about Crockett's career wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of hierarchy. Murkowski wasn't merely questioning Crockett's qualifications. She was reminding everyone of her own place at the top of the ladder. The arrogance was subtle, wrapped in the language of seasoned authority. Yet it dripped with a deeper message. I belong here. You don't. That was the real sting of her words. And in that sting, audiences across the country felt a familiar echo of a system where doors were closed to some before they ever had the chance to knock. To the establishment, Murkowski was still the elder stateswoman, untouchable. But to the millions watching, her attack exposed something she likely hadn't intended. Fear. Fear of the changing tides. Fear of voices rising that couldn't be silenced with pedigree or years in office. Fear that the ground beneath her, once so solid, was shifting in ways even she couldn't control. And that fear would soon collide with a truth Murkowski wasn't ready to face. Because Jasmine Crockett was no stranger to being underestimated, and every time it happened, she found a way to turn the insult into fuel. Jasmine Crockett's story was never meant to be ordinary. Long before she entered the bright lights of national politics, her life had been a battle against invisibility. She was a daughter of working-class grit, the kind of upbringing where nothing was handed over without sweat, without resilience, without a willingness to fight harder than anyone else in the room. Where Murkowski inherited position, Crockett earned survival. That difference defined her. From a young age, she knew what it meant to be told no. No, you don't belong here. No, you don't look the part. No, you don't have the pedigree. And each rejection became a stone in the foundation of a character built on resistance. She carried those rejections into classrooms, into internships, into law offices where she would cut her teeth as a defender of the overlooked. Law was never just a career for her. It was a calling. While others chased corporate prestige, Crockett chose clients who couldn't afford to be heard. She walked into courtrooms not as an equal, but as an outsider determined to balance the scales. Every victory she earned was against odds stacked steeply against her. Every loss carved deep in the conviction that dignity was not a privilege reserved for the few. It was a right that had to be fought for by the many. Those battles hardened her voice. By the time she stepped into politics, Crockett had become more than an attorney. She was an advocate for the silenced, someone who had turned personal wounds into collective purpose. When she spoke, it wasn't with the detachment of an elite. It was with the fire of someone who had lived the struggle she described. That authenticity resonated. Crowds didn't just listen. They leaned in because they saw in her reflection of themselves. Her rise wasn't meteoric. It was grueling. Long nights, relentless criticism, the kind of scrutiny designed to break candidates before they even begin. But Crockett thrived in those crucibles. Every headline doubting her, every pundit dismissing her, became oxygen for the fire she carried. And that's why Murkowski's jab cut deeper than some realized. For Crockett, it was never just about politics. It was about the countless people whose stories mirrored her own. People told their whole lives that their voices didn't matter. To dismiss her was to dismiss them. And that was something she would never allow. The audience watching didn't yet know the weight of the life behind the steady calm on Crockett's face. But they were about to, because this was not a woman who crumbled under insult. This was a woman forged by it. The chamber grew hotter with each passing minute, though no one had moved. Murkowski sat taller now, emboldened by her own words, as though the debate had already tipped decisively in her favor. She peppered her points with half-smiles and knowing glances. Her voice sharpened like a blade meant to slice Crockett's composure apart piece by piece. Every sentence was layered with condescension, each one a reminder that she believed herself untouchable. Crockett, however, refused to match that fire with fire. Instead, she leaned into a silence so powerful it unsettled even her supporters. While Murkowski spoke louder, Crockett's quiet confidence grew heavier, pulling attention toward her without a single interruption. Viewers at home could feel it. The balance of power in the room was beginning to shift, though Murkowski hadn't realized it yet. The tension broke when Murkowski tried again to strike, this time framing Crockett's career as a momentary burst of passion, destined to fade. The words drew a ripple of gasps and one or two murmurs of agreement from her side of the aisle. Murkowski leaned back smugly, convinced she had landed the final blow. But then Crockett moved, slowly, deliberately. She leaned forward, her eyes locking on Murkowski with the precision of someone who had been waiting for this exact second. The room seemed to contract around her, shrinking into the stillness before a storm. Cameras zoomed closer. Pundits whispered over live feeds, already speculating what Crockett's answer might be. Murkowski, satisfied with herself, almost chuckled under her breath. And that's when the silence snapped. With her first words, measured and deliberate, Crockett began to unravel everything Murkowski had just constructed. Her tone wasn't angry. It was resolute, sharp, and utterly unshaken. The contrast was undeniable. One woman wielding arrogance like a weapon, the other wielding truth like a shield. The debate had shifted, and though Murkowski still believed she controlled the narrative, the crowd could already sense what was coming. This wasn't the prelude to Crockett's collapse. This was a setup for a response so powerful it would echo far beyond that stage. Jasmine Crockett's voice cut through the air with a clarity that demanded attention. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. Her words carried weight because they came wrapped in lived truth, and everyone in the room could feel the difference immediately. "You call my career fleeting," she began, steady and unflinching. "But what you dismiss as a headline is the lived reality of millions who don't have the luxury of inheriting power. My career isn't measured by titles passed down or doors open for me. It's measured by the people I've stood beside when no one else would stand with them." The chamber stirred. Murkowski blinked, caught off guard by the calm precision of the reply. Crockett didn't stop. Each line built on the last, her voice weaving a rhythm that grew stronger with every sentence. She spoke of communities left behind, of clients who had no champion but her, of battles won not with privilege but with persistence. "You call it fleeting," Crockett pressed, her eyes fixed on Murkowski. "But I call it earned, and that difference matters. Because when I speak here, I don't carry the entitlement of position. I carry the trust of people who believe no one in power would ever hear them." The silence after those words was deafening. Murkowski shifted in her chair, suddenly aware that her smirk had vanished. Cameras caught every flicker of unease crossing her face. For the first time, it was clear. The ground beneath her confidence was cracking. And then came the moment, the line that would echo beyond the debate stage. Crockett leaned forward, her tone unwavering. "If my career is fleeting, then it is only because the fight for dignity in this country has been made fleeting by people who prefer to preserve themselves instead of serving others. But I will never stop serving." The room erupted. Applause, cheers, even gasps filled the chamber. Commentators scrambled over each other on live feeds to capture what had just happened. Murkowski had come to bury Crockett's credibility, but in one devastating counterattack, Crockett had transformed insult into triumph. And yet, the night was far from over, because what happened after this exchange was spread far beyond these walls, and turned one debate moment into a national shockwave. The debate ended, but the echo of Crockett's words refused to die down. Within minutes, clips of her counterattack flooded social media, spreading with wildfire speed. Hashtags blazed across platforms, turning her response into the moment everyone was talking about. Commentators who had doubted her earlier now admitted on live broadcasts that they had witnessed a turning point. Memes appeared, celebrating the contrast between Murkowski's smirk and the stunned silence that followed Crockett's takedown. Influencers, activists, and even celebrities reposted her words, calling a reminder that dignity and truth still had power in politics. For many, it wasn't just a debate highlight, it was validation, proof that someone was willing to stand tall against arrogance and entitlement. Meanwhile, Murkowski's team scrambled. The jab that was meant to secure dominance had backfired spectacularly, painting her as the embodiment of elitism. The more people replayed the exchange, the more her calculated attack looked desperate, even fearful. Across the country, young viewers, immigrants, and first-time voters felt the ripple effect. They saw in Crockett's composure a reflection of their own struggles, and in her triumph, a glimpse of possibility. What started as an insult in a crowded chamber had exploded into a cultural moment. But Crockett wasn't content to let it end with applause. She knew words alone weren't enough. The real power would come in what she chose to do next, how she turned this viral firestorm into a lasting message about who truly belongs in America's story. Crockett addressed the nation not with gloating, but with grace. She reminded people that politics was never about trading insults. It was about carrying the voices of those who have been ignored. "I don't fight because it's easy," she said. "I fight because too many of us are told our worth is temporary, our presence fleeting. But dignity is not fleeting. Justice is not fleeting. And our voices will not be silenced." Her words lifted the moment beyond personal victory. It became a universal call, a reminder that arrogance may dominate a stage for a time, but truth endures far longer. Crockett had not only defended herself, she had reframed the attack into a statement about belonging, resilience, and the shared struggle of millions. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a declaration that America's future would not be written by the gatekeepers of privilege, but by those who refuse to be dismissed. And so, the debate that began with a career-ending insult ended with a career-defining moment. Lisa Murkowski had tried to cast Jasmine Crockett as fleeting, disposable, forgettable. Instead, Crockett showed the nation what happens when dignity confronts arrogance head-on. She didn't just survive the attack. She transformed it into a rallying cry. The lesson was clear. Real strength isn't inherited, it's earned. And in that chamber, in that clash, America witnessed a reminder that truth, resilience, and courage can shake even the most entrenched powers. But this story isn't just Jasmine Crockett's. It's ours. Every person who has ever been told they don't belong, every immigrant who has been silenced, every worker dismissed as replaceable. This moment belongs to you. Because when Crockett turned the tables, she didn't just defend herself. She defended the idea that our worth is not defined by those who try to diminish it. That's why we tell these stories. That's why we amplify these voices. And if you believe in keeping dignity alive in the face of arrogance, then this is your movement too. This is Argument Arena. Subscribe, share, and stand with us, because the fight for justice isn't over, and the next moment of truth is already on its way.